So I've been studying human performance at the university setting for over 20 years. And in the last wee while, we got really curious about how people were actually doing. So we asked people coast to coast to coast, all over North America and Central America, how would you describe how you feel most of the time? Could you pick one word? And we were a little bit startled because the word that people used to describe how they felt most of the time, personally and professionally, was done. They're like, Robyne, I feel done. And it wasn't like done, I got all my work done, or hey, I finished Netflix and that was a trip. It literally was done as in they just didn't have any more to give. So we got really curious about, okay, well, what is it that people need right now? What can we do to help carry the load for persons? And what was interesting, when we kind of dug deep and figured out what is it that people need, the number one response that people said, I would be able to do life better if I had this one thing, it was energy. Okay, so how do we help people feel engaged and enrolled if they're feeling tired and depleted? So I was really curious because something that we know to be true is that like if you want energy, you have to like move and you have to work out. But if you're too tired, it's like hard to do that. So was there any other way that we could activate human kinetic energy? And what we came upon is a concept in psychology that's called empathetic attunement. And what we've learned is if you can show up for someone in the right way, it actually generates human energy. And I'll give you an example of this in the wild. So starting with the question, do we want comfort or do we want solutions? Now, I have 3 teenagers, and last school year, I was chatting with my boys. They were, at the time, they were 19, and I was chatting with my son, who at the time was 15, and we were just having a little team huddle. We were having a little chit-chat, and then all of a sudden, their sister came home from school who's 17. Has anyone ever seen a 17-year-old girl in a mood? Do you all know what I'm talking about? So I turned to my boys to suggest, make sure to give your sister some space, but the boys were already gone. They fled. And now I'm standing there with this daughter who's super keyed up. And I said to her, Ava, whatever you're going through, do you want comfort or solutions in this moment? And she said, Mama, I want you to sit down with me right now, and I need you to hate math as much as I do. And I'm like, sister, I got you. So we commiserated about everything that was wrong with the grade 11 math curriculum in Ontario, which is where I get to call home. And once I noticed she started to re-regulate, I asked Ava, what happened today at school that got you so keyed up? And she says, Mama, I was in English class, like literature class, and the teacher said, Ava, what's the last book that you read that made you cry? And Ava said, calculus, actually. And she felt, though, embarrassed. And what's interesting is if I would have shown up for that conversation when she said, hey, I need you to hate math, and I said, no, math is important. We're going to get you a tutor. We're just going to work harder. We're just going to kind of really pull up this practice. The reality is she wouldn't have felt seen. She wouldn't have felt heard. She would have felt alone. And what's so amazing is that we feel big feelings like overwhelm when we feel alone in that big feeling. And as soon as we have one ally who's willing to stand with us, all of a sudden everything becomes much more possible and we can start to re-regulate. Now, I've been studying this idea, and again, I want to give you lots of practical tools, but also just understanding a wee bit of the underpinnings behind this research. So when I started this research, I asked this research question to get me started. Why is it that some people give up when life is hard, yet other people find a way to get up? I wanted to know the psychology of the underdog. And what was really interesting at the time in the literature, people were talking about this thing called grit, toughness, hardiness, and they said human resiliency is a person's ability to be strong. So I got to go out into the field and work with people all over the world, all through North America, Central America, even through the Middle East. And I would meet some of the most resilient persons you've ever seen in your life. And I would talk to them about their toughness, their grit. And the most common response I heard from those people was, Robyne, I don't think I'm very strong. I don't think I'm particularly good at this. I'm not very gritty. So then I asked the question, well, how are you able to be resilient if it isn't this inner strength? And what they told me was something so significant. They said, Robyne, I was resilient because life didn't give me another choice. I had to be. I had family counting on me. I had a community counting on me. I just found a way to persist and persevere. So then I got curious as a scientist, well, whoever said resiliency had to do with toughness or grit? So I went back into the literature, and at the time in the 80s and the 90s, the most predominant group that they used as a control group to study human resiliency was one particular group, and that group were Navy SEALs. Now, I don't know about you, but I did not wake up this morning and do my workout and then compare myself to David Goggins and be like, how did I do measured up to you, right? Navy SEALs isn't the comparator that most of us are working with. What we were able to then uncover is that there was a component of human ability that was different that we actually coined everyday resiliency. Because we weren't talking about like, how do you get through Hell Week? We wanted to know, how do you show up for your teams, your clients, your groups, when maybe you have a sick child at home, or maybe you're worried about an elderly relative, or perhaps you're waiting for a phone call for a diagnosis. Yet you still have to show up and perform, but your heart is in different places. And what we learned from those persons all throughout the world is they actually had these 5 things in common, and this is what they leaned into to be able to navigate whatever hard part of their life they came upon.